late June of this year. And at this point, I have to say, Gregory, it turned into a shootout like Hollywood. President Bio wanted to win. He was challenged by a man named Camara. What happened?
Well, it was certainly an interesting situation. Bio was becoming isolated, more and more isolated from the electorate, and was using the police and elements within the armed forces to extract money from the economy and from the electorate over the years. And there was no doubt that he would have been removed at this election. So going into the election, all the way up, he tried to get rid of his number one rival, who had in fact been a cabinet minister in his own government earlier. That's Dr. Samura Kamara, former foreign minister, among other things, of Sierra Leone. And he tried to assassinate Kamara on 3 or 4 occasions, the last being the day after the election and before the votes had been so-called counted. He wanted to make sure that Kamara wasn't around, even if the election was announced in his favor. Now, Bio had actually paid a lot of money to the election commissioner, a chap called Mohammed Kone, to make sure that whatever happened, the count would be in Bio's favor. And by the way, I know Bio, and I've met him on numerous occasions over the years. Even though this election commissioner, Mohammed Kone, had agreed to this and been paid large amounts of money, he was himself frightened by all of the violence going on, particularly even the day after the election. And he was in Bio's office, according to some very good contacts of mine who were there, and a gun was put at Kone's head and said, you must announce me as the winner immediately. Kone panicked, got out of the room, and got brief protection, if you like, from some of the foreign observer missions. The Brits, the Germans, the Irish, the EU, the Italians, and so on, were all there in large numbers monitoring the election, as were a number of other civilian groups like the Carter Institute and the like. However, Kone knew that he couldn't go back on his word to Bio because his corruption would have been brought into the public eye. So he did announce that Bio won the election, but did it in such a way that it was totally implausible. He gave no supporting documentation for the election, quite contrary to historical practices there and the like. But this is just, if you like, the way it's been going. It was like the Nigerian election, only much more amateurish and much more thuggish and violent, to the point where all of the election observers, the British, the EU, and Carter Group, and so on, all refused to sign off on this election. And my office in Freetown, Sierra Leone, was heavily engaged with this. We know Dr. Kamara, we know President Bio, so we were talking to all of them. But what we've noticed, and what I said in October 2021, I said, look, this is the end of democracy in Africa. We are going to increasingly see other forms of change of government. We're not going to see elections being the determinant, other than rigged ones, which are basically putting on a facade of legitimacy. And this has been the case. So since October 2021, so we're talking almost 3 years, we've started to see one country after another go into, shall we say, informal means of changing government. Now, this is due to 2 factors mainly. One is the absolute decline in the ability of Western governments, namely particularly Britain, the United States, and France, as the former colonial powers in much of Africa, to exercise any leverage whatsoever. They've lost all leverage in Africa. The second reason, though, it goes back to the historical colonial boundaries of these countries, where they brought together into the borders of, say, Sierra Leone or Nigeria or Liberia, whatever, large numbers of different tribal groups, all of which had in the past been self-governing, but they were brought together to create colonial states with modern names like Nigeria and Sierra Leone and Liberia and South Africa, but they're still not united. the only united group within most of these countries, and the same thing, by the way, applies to, for example, India and Pakistan in the post-colonial days, the only unifying national body is the military. So naturally, the military is going to take power when they can. And President Bio in Sierra Leone, who has just reclaimed power, is a former brigadier general in the army. And by the way, as soon as his election in the past few days was discredited, the president of the neighboring country, Guinea, also under a military president, by the way, Lieutenant Colonel Doumbouya, who came to power in a coup on September the 5th, 2021. He started moving troops into the border, saying he was going to go into Freetown, Sierra Leone, and arrest Bio. Bio himself, in the last day, went to Conakry, the capital of Guinea, to plead with Doumbouya to have an agreement where Doumbouya would support him. That's still not resolved as to how that's going to turn out, but Doumbouya himself doesn't want any questions about his legitimacy either. So you've got all these other things. Now, Bio has called all of the paramount chiefs of the various tribes in Sierra Leone and their staffs of those paramount chiefs to come to Freetown in a big public display of support so that he can tell the international community, look, I'm who the country wants. I've got this popular acclaim, and you have to legitimize my election. I don't believe that's going to work. So I think we're going to see Sierra Leone increasingly isolated, along with Guinea. But what do they care? Because what's the West going to do about them? Yes, Washington will say, well, we won't let them come to have a holiday in Washington or New York or whatever. But the reality is that they are now, because of our if you like, moral high ground, we're going to drive them into the arms of the Russians and the People's Republic of China, and actually also the Iranians, who've got a lot of diplomacy going in Africa. So it's getting to be a very, very messy situation. The West has lost legitimacy. The West cannot stop Africa from turning its back on really legitimate and transparent democratic processes, except in a number of countries like Morocco, for example. Morocco has incredibly honest and open and transparent elections, very, very significant. But the reality is that the West is going to have to come up with a new way of accepting, and it will do business its own way. We will start to see some of the countries becoming more broken up in terms of their original ethnic and linguistic and religious shapes. So it's going to be an interesting decade or two ahead of us. And even the People's Republic of China is not really well equipped to deal with this.
So what we have here is one of the smallest states, 9 million Sierra Leone, and the largest state, 230 million Nigeria, following the same path. And I take it that they're self-aware that the military is now the uniter, but also the divider, if it chooses to. Other states are following this. It's another way of presenting this civil war in Ethiopia, the breakup into private armies, and Addis Ababa trying to centralize the story, but then outside actors. And you say that China doesn't have any skills, any better skills than anyone else. But I'm not even sure that that Washington and Britain and Whitehall are trying. Are they, Gregory? Have they given up? Have they washed their hands?
No, they haven't washed their hands of it, actually. In fact, the British were very, very active in supporting the Sierra Leone government, including President Bio, and tried to help him. They offered training and arms and so on, and also medical teams to support them when they had the various epidemics breaking out in Sierra Leone. Brits have been very good in that. So has Beijing. Beijing built, for example, all of the army barracks for the Sierra Leone armed forces. What we saw today was that President Bio issued a petulant statement attacking the governments of Britain, Germany, Ireland, Italy, and the EU, and the United States over their refusal to recognize the legitimacy of his government. That's not going to help him, and it's certainly not going to help the West regain some control. But if anybody in Sierra Leone can make a difference, it's going to be the Brits. The question is, will they do that? I think they will, because Britain has so much invested in Leone, and that they'll keep pressing there. That was a beautiful state, which was very, very supportive of Britain, and you have Sierra Leoneans moving freely backwards and forwards to the United Kingdom on a regular basis, and they feel as very much part of the Commonwealth. So the question is, how can London and how can Bio resurrect that relationship? Bio is not smart enough, in my opinion, to be subtle on this matter. Look, he was driven a lot by his wife's absolute greed and corruption. She made it impossible for him to be seen as honest, because she was busily gathering money and gathering, great toys of office, and this really made the president look bad anyway. And by the way, when the election looked like it was going sideways, and when the final attempt on Kamara's life was made, she promptly hopped on an airplane and went down to the Gambia, to the capital there, Banjul, so that she would be out of the way. She wasn't sticking by her man there.
We need to go to Scotland. There's been an important event in the life of King Charles III. I'm with Gregory Copley, Defense and Foreign Affairs editor and publisher, and my guide on the crowning, the second crowning of King Charles and the royal